Okay, today I'm going to go over HVAC invoicing. It's a little bit different than the normal tickets that we do. We pay for the taxes for the materials when we go to the vendors, so that's why we do this a little bit differently. But to start, we go to Service, Tasks, Service Accounting, and Invoice Listing. Now, this is going to show a list of all of the invoices. Right now, it's set to all. So, all of the invoices in the system for all divisions between these dates here. So we just want to look at HVAC. We can leave the dates as they are. You do have to be kind of careful once we roll over into April. This will automatically go to 4/1, so you're only going to see anything from 4/1 onwards. So you'd probably want to change this back just a little bit so you don't miss any invoices. So we've got the date in here, 3/1 to 3/16. We only want to look at not approved tickets, and then we can narrow it down by division here. So we're going to go down to HVAC, select that. Okay, so these are all of the open HVAC tickets in this period. I'm going to start with a really simple one. Like these $75 ones are pretty simple to do. The first thing we want to do is to put it into a batch. Oh, and to get into each invoice, just click these little arrows here. So I'm going to highlight this and put this in my batch. I've got one running here. The batch name isn't too important. Usually we try to put the date and then your initials somewhere in here. You could put AR2 and then whatever your initials are. And then you would also want to have an AR batch. Those are the ones that we would mail out to customers. And that would just be AR and then your initials. But we put AR2 for ones that are already paid, and we see this one's paid. So enter that batch number, or you can find it from this drop down list. But once you enter the batch number, hit tab, and that will ask if you want to assign the invoice to the batch. You'll say yes here. If you're just creating the batch for the first time, it'll give you an additional dialog saying, do you want to create that batch? And you'll say yes as well. So the first thing we do is go to the info page. Always remove the cash date. It's not absolutely necessary, but it helps eliminate one error that can happen. We don't need to go into it necessarily, but first thing, delete the cash date. So that'll be 0. Make sure the division is correct, which is 65. That's right. The tax code, make sure that's correct. So this will be Wichita. And the invoice amount was $75. We know it was paid by credit card. All of the invoices go in as accounts receivable invoice because the payments post later. So we just post them as accounts receivable and then the payments apply later. We want to make sure the invoice style, we always set that to service type summary. Otherwise, sometimes it might default to full detail, and we normally don't want to send out full detail invoices. So we'll make sure that service type summary. If this was a check payment here, you would see a check number. The technician should put that in there. And if it is a check or cash payment, we also change this salesman to mobile. And we just do that so Sherry can run a report for the mobile salesman, and that will show any invoices where she hasn't received the cash or the check from the technician. So that's why we put that on there. Finally, we want to make sure the technician is correct. If there were multiple technicians and maybe the first person who went out isn't supposed to get any credit for that, just make sure you've got the right technician selected. We've just got David here, so that's fine. Then we want to make sure the services provided are correct. It's either going to be HVAC or HVAC commercial. Sometimes it might be HVAC installation. You probably won't have to worry about install invoices right now, but HVAC service is fine for this, so we're going to save. And then we're going to go to the billing details. So now we see the $75 line here. There's almost always an extra $0 line. I'm not sure why, but you can delete that if you want. You can leave it. It doesn't matter. Normally I'll delete it just to clean things up a little bit. So he just charged the $75 here. So I'm going to save that. Go to the work description. Usually I'll go through and just make sure it doesn't look too messy. The technicians like to use a lot of run-on sentences. So sometimes I'll fix that, especially if it's something that we're going to send out in the mail or to a company. I'll normally clean all that up. This one I'm just going to go ahead and save that, and then we're going to exit. And that is all for the really basic invoices. Then you just approve that, and you'll see that it's in your approved little subcategory over here. That's all for the basic ones, so you can just exit that. Now if you refresh this page, this invoice that we just completed is going to disappear off of there. Another easy way to refresh, if you just push Alt and then R, push those together, it'll refresh the page for you. So now we're going to move on to one that has a purchase order on it. This is where it gets a little bit different from the invoices that we do for plumbing or any of the other divisions. So I'm going to go to this ticket here. So again, first thing you do is put that in your batch, hit tab, and yes, I am going to assign that to this batch. We go to the info, zero out the cash date. Division 65 is correct. The tax code is Wichita. This was also a credit card payment, so all of this should already be in here for you. Accounts receivable. See, we're going to change this invoice style to service type summary. It's not a cash or a check ticket, so I don't need to worry about doing the mobile salesman. And we see that Cole was the only technician on here. If there is a purchase order that's required, like if we did work for like a service company or any kind of purchase order, just make sure you've got that in there, their PO number. And HVAC service, that's going to be correct here. So now we go to the billing details tab. So now normally, sometimes the purchase order isn't already pulled into the ticket, and if not, then this is going to pop up and say, do you want to put them in there? And of course we do, so we're going to say yes here. We make sure the status is set to closed. If the status is set to open, we can't do anything with the ticket, and that's why it's really important that the technicians have to send in receipts, and we have to get these closed as soon as possible so we can get the tickets done. This is closed, so I'm going to go ahead and click Save, and that's going to pull that purchase order line item in here. I'm going to go ahead and delete this 0 line just to clean it up a little bit. The technicians also, if they don't pull in that purchase order, they just put the total amount of the ticket on their labor line. So we see that's $175 here. Now that $43 is going to have to be deducted from their labor. So we take the $175 and take out the $43. So his labor amount is actually going to be $132. So now we'll change that on this sales amount, and we will save that. So we see the ticket total is $175. Okay, now on HVAC tickets, we actually don't want to have a sales amount on the purchase order line item. Like I said, we pay the taxes up front with the vendor. So if we were to leave this $43 on here, the state of Kansas would actually require us to collect tax on that marked up material price. So we don't want to do that. So then we go back to the general info tab and we just add a service type. Oh, actually, disregard that. We don't do that anymore. You don't need to add anything there. But we are going to change something here. So we're going to create a new line. We're going to change the bill code to FL, which is flat rate labor. So all of that, once you click FL, it'll fill all this other stuff in for you. And all we do is move this sales amount from the purchase order line item down to this FL line. Okay, so our total is $175. We've got our flat rate labor line. That is the amount that we are charging for the material, but we're not paying any extra tax on that, so that's why we do that. So I'll save that. Again, fix the work description if you want to, especially if we're sending it out to a customer. And then we just approve the invoice, and that's in your approved over here. So once you have accumulated approved invoices, then I'll go through and check them over. I'll print anything out that needs to be printed out, and then I'll post the invoices. But that's basically how you deal with the material lines on the invoices. It would be the same thing if the technician had used like an inventory part. Um, so instead of it being a PO, like if it said, some part number and then it had a sales amount here, all you do is just move that sales amount to an FL line. If there's multiple parts, you can add all of them up and put them on one FL line. That's fine. But just any kind of materials, we're going to move to that FL flat rate labor line. Okay, and again, if you push Alt R, that will refresh and get rid of that invoice. The last invoice I want to talk about is maybe Sawin Properties. We do a lot of Sawin Properties calls, so that would be a good one to do. I've got one here. Okay, and this one, it does actually have inventory material on here. Same process, we're going to put that into our batch. Go to Info, zero out that cash date. Now something a little bit different about the Sawin Properties ones is we change the payment method to no charge, and we zero out the invoice amount. None of this other stuff really matters because we're not mailing anything out, but I go ahead and do it anyway. The other thing on this is we do have to change the division to 00, and we change the service type. We know when we book these calls for Sawin Properties, we want to try to book them as this internal repair and maintenance properties. So always make sure if you're doing a Sawin Properties ticket that you've got that service type in there. So we save that. So it's saying we've zeroed out the sales amount, and are you sure? Yes, we want to do that. This Sawin Properties service type is a use tax type, and that is what we want to do. Since we are not charging anything out to a customer, then it's going to accrue use tax that we need to pay, theoretically. Usually we would already have paid the tax on these HVAC tickets, so that might be something we have to change on that service type. But anyway, we go to the billing details. We see that all of our sales amounts have zeroed out because we made this a no charge ticket. The problem is that the service type was set to HVAC when we first started this ticket, and all of this stuff was already in here. So we do have to go through on each line and change this to the internal and change the division to 0. You won't have to do this if the call was booked with that internal P service type and division 0. So that's why we do that when we book the calls, so we don't have to go through and do this on the ticket. But now all the line items have that internal P and 00. So we save and go to the work description. You don't have to worry too much about the work description here, but that's all on the Sawin Properties ones. Then we just approve that. And now that's going to go to your approved / printed one because it's not ever going to need to be printed because it's a 0 ticket. So it'll just, the system treats it as if it's already been printed. Okay, and then Alt R, and that gets rid of that. Actually, there's one more invoice that's good that we have on here, and that is for Ready Industries. These are really similar to the tickets that we do for Sawin Properties. So we're gonna put this in a batch. Go to the info, zero out the cash date. We want to make sure the division is 0 for these ones too. Anything that we're doing work at the shop. Payment method will be no charge. And now this service type, it's very similar to Sawin Properties, but we want it to say internal repairs and maintenance. And this is only for stuff that we're doing at Ready Industries shop. Okay, and then we're going to save that. You get these pop-ups here. Go to the billing details, just make sure that any line items on here have to have that internal and 00. Save that. It looks like they were using this ticket for some hourly shop time, so this is sales training. And then we will approve that. And again, that goes down to this approved and printed. One thing I did forget to mention, When I do the commission reports for the technicians, I use letters at the end of the invoice numbers to help me determine, I can quickly go through and see which tickets are hourly. So on this Ready Industries one, I'm going to go to change invoice, and we're just going to put an H behind that. That just tells me that it's an hourly ticket, so when I pull all the data into the spreadsheet, that will kind of automatically do that for me. And I'm going to do that also on this previous Stephen Properties call. So any Stephen Properties, any shop tickets, we want to change that and put an H behind it. And you just click change invoice, type in the new invoice number, and save. Now if there are any tickets that we went to a customer's house and the technician is just requesting hourly for some reason or another, you do need to send that invoice to Tommy first, and he needs to approve the hourly. We're not just going to pay hourly just because they want it or because they asked for it. Tommy needs to approve that. So normally what I would do, you should have a snipping tool on your system. If you don't see that, you can just go to your menu and just type snip, and that will pull that up for you. But I go to the snipping tool, click new, and then just highlight this. And then you can you can email it to him. So I would go to copy and then create a new email. And then down here, if you paste, that will just paste that in there. And I'll just put, hourly request here. And then I would send that off to him. Okay, so that's really any kind of the HVAC invoices that you might run into. It looks like there might be an install invoice on there. If you do run into these, you don't have to worry about doing them. For now, I'll take a look at them and I'll run them through Tommy so he can double check them and make sure the technicians are charging for everything correctly. So if you see any install invoices, don't worry about those. If you have any questions on this, just let me know and I'll try to explain it. That should cover any of the basics and any of the tickets that have any parts on it. So that's all for this.